Hey y'all, it's me, Kevvie! So in September, Rachel Fryman hosted the Bob's Burgers Readathon. She provided a bingo board where each space represented a character from the show, and each character was assigned a prompt. The challenge for the Readathon was to make a bingo out of what you read. Of course, being the completionist that I am, I wanted to fill the entire board. So here are the books that I read for the Bob's Burgers Readathon. The first book I read was The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonya Renee Taylor. It's a self-help book about radical self-love. Is it awful of me to say that I liked the foreword of the book better than the book itself? I went into it hoping, wishful thinking I guess, that this would be a little more memoir-y with self-help elements. But no, it was just straight up self-help. Like I said in my September wrap-up, this author quoted some excellent authors. But no, this book is very beginner level, so it was pretty useless for me, and some of its conversations were actually pretty triggering. At least it was short and easy to sprint through, which was my primary reason for choosing it. On the bingo board, The Body Is Not an Apology completed the Mr. Frond prompt of reading a self-help book. Next, I read Death Comes as the End by Agatha Christie. This book is interesting for being the first historical whodunit, being based on real-life papyrus scrolls from ancient Egypt. However, Christie's xenophobia is very much at play in the writing of the novel, which led me to DNFing it the first time I tried to read it. Now that I've given it another shot, I enjoyed it. The mystery was pretty good, and I was able to solve it pretty quickly. Death Comes as the End counted for 2 prompts on the bingo board. First is Hugo, revisit a DNF, because I had DNF'd this book earlier this year, and Fish Odor, Over the Top, because this one has one of Christie's highest death counts. I think it was like 7 or 8. The next book I read for the readathon was Oscar Wilde's Picture of Dorian Gray. This one's a classic and very gay-coded. I loved the opening paragraph with the description of Basil's studio because it was about as blatantly gay as they could get at the time. This one set me back with my reading schedule because my Kindle said it was only about 100 pages, but then it wound up being closer to 250 pages and took much longer to read than I anticipated. That setback was really frustrating and caused me to lose all the momentum I had been building. It wasn't my favorite book, but I'm glad I read it, and I'm excited for my upcoming video discussing its connection to one of my favorite 20th century Chicago artists. I used the Picture of Dorian Gray for 3 prompts. The first was Jimmy Jr.'s prompt to do a reread. I first read Dorian Gray in high school, so this was my second time reading it. I also used it for the Jimmy Pesto prompt. Enemies. Dorian Gray's enemy in this novel is his portrait. Because while out in the world, Dorian Gray remains unchanging, forever young and beautiful, the portrait reveals his true nature, being corrupt and evil. Anyone who would gaze on the portrait would know the truth of Dorian Gray. So as long as it exists, he is in danger of being exposed. I also counted Dorian Gray for Tammy's stinky cover prompt, because this one is just awful. The brown was an ugly choice to begin with, and then the portrait they chose to use inside the circle is hideous and doesn't convey anything about the portrait of the novel. My greatest undertaking of this readathon was the 472 pages of Tipping the Velvet by Sarah Waters. This is a romance, which y'all know I normally don't do, but it isn't just any romance. Tipping the Velvet is a lesbian drag king historical romance. Yeah. It's awesome. It's about Nancy Astley, daughter from a seaside family that sells oysters. One day she goes to the theater and sees male impersonator Kitty Butler and immediately falls for her. Eventually she goes backstage to meet Kitty and it is electric. Part 1 of this novel filled me with so much joy. I knew as I was reading it that this would become something that I would return to over and over and over. I loved it so much. Parts 2 and 3 may not have had the same magic as part 1, but they were still very good. I really loved this novel, and it may have changed my mind about romance as a whole. Also, throughout part 2, I kept thinking that Rebecca Wysocki would be perfect to play the role of Diana in an adaptation. I counted Tipping the Velvet for 4 prompts. The first was Gail, cat on the cover, because, well, there's a naked woman with her cat on display. But also because one of the women on the cover is the character Kitty, so therefore it doubly counts. I also used Tipping the Velvet for Tina, boy on the cover, because while they may not be boys in the strictest sense, they are male impersonators, so I'm a count it. I figured this could also work for Gretchen's prompt, chick lit, because the romance genre is heavily targeted towards women. The last prompt I used Tipping the Velvet for was Zeke, all the feels, because Tipping the Velvet put me through it. The highest of highs and the lowest of lows. This novel is everything I ever could have wanted from a book. Then I read A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers. This book is about a middle-aged food critic who murders and eats her ex-lovers. Yeah, excellent premise. Unfortunately, a lot of this book really dragged. The descriptions of her murders and subsequent cannibalism were excellent. Everything else was slow and boring. You could tell that the narrator was meant to be a professional writer because she used needlessly complex language that slowed down the reading experience. It was certainly worth reading for the fabulous and bizarre takes on cannibalism. My favorite part of this book, aside from, the murders and cannibalism, was that she spent a whole paragraph dedicated to discussing one of my favorite artists, Ivan Albright. He's actually the artist I'm going to be discussing in my Dorian Gray video. And this horrible face that I used to the Dorian Gray bingo chip is actually Ivan Albright's painting. The painting Summers discusses in A Certain Hunger is one that I've seen many times in person at the Art Institute, commonly known as The Door. Its proper title is That Which I Should Have Done I Did Not Do. This masterpiece took 10 years to complete because of his obsession with the fine details. Oh, it is amazing. Expect a closer look at it soon. But yeah, reading about that in A Certain Hunger made my day. A Certain Hunger fit 3 prompts on the bingo board. The first and most obvious is Bob's prompt, featuring food. This book is all about food, human flesh or otherwise. I also used this book for Teddy's prompt, Best Friends, because of the protagonist's bestie, Emma. It also applies to Louise's prompt, Revenge Plot, although I can't really go into why without going into spoiler territory, which I don't feel like doing right now. But yeah, there is definitely a revenge plot in the novel. Linda's prompt was the only one which didn't involve reading. Rather, you were supposed to watch an adaptation. Kipple and I decided to watch the 1941 film adaptation of The Maltese Falcon, starring Humphrey Bogart as Sam Spade. I just read The Maltese Falcon last month for the Mid-Year Mystery Madness Readathon, and I didn't really like it that much. Hard-boiled mysteries are just not my thing. The film was definitely an improvement. For starters, while 2 of the 3 women were still flirting the house-down boots with Sam Spade, the secretary's flirtations were toned down significantly, so it was less stupidly chick-magnety. Also, Sam Spade looked like a real person. In the novel, the author describes Sam Spade as having a V-shaped head, and all of his facial features were V-shaped. I wound up just picturing him as the fox from Courage the Cowardly Dog. But in the film, his head looked much more natural and believably human. Also, while for the most part this adaptation was very faithful to the book, they did fortunately remove the scene that was the worst part of the novel, which was a big relief for me and made the story easier to enjoy. So yeah, Maltese Falcon, better as a movie. And with that, I completed Linda's prompt. The final book I read for the Bob's Burgers Readathon was Milkfed by Melissa Broder. Oh, I loved this book. This is a book that was written just for me. It's about a woman who has a very complicated relationship with what she eats after a childhood full of food-related trauma caused by her mother. Then one day she meets a fat Jewish woman who shows her the beauty of food. The way she described what she ate was so good. Way better than the descriptions in A Certain Hunger. Listen to this. It was so decadent to put sesame seeds and flour on chicken and fry it up in a fattening sauce. This was what made it so delicious. The knowledge that underneath all those carbs and fat was chicken, which could have been healthy, but for the sake of taste, was not. It was like a fuck you to the chicken. It was a fuck you to everything. Fuck me, I said. in a celebration as I took a joyful bite. Yes! The pleasure this narrator experiences from the decadent food she eats was reminiscent of how I experience food. So it was wonderful to see someone get genuine pleasure out of the food they eat, beyond, oh yeah, that tastes good. Also, this book did incredible things to show that fat bodies are not just beautiful, but they are desirable. Her bra, a modest beige, strained to contain her breasts. Below that rolled the waves of her belly, her navel wide and deep, moving up and down with her breath. I was so grateful for everything I got to see and that she was letting me gaze at her like this. I loved that she was able to recognize that this fat body was meant to be respected and revered. And then she continues, at any moment, I thought that something wondrous might come out. Deeply sweet, butterscotch topping, warm caramel, honey. Then the space between her rolls became like pussies to me, and I thought, how incredible. She has so many pussies, so many places to explore. I love this description for showing that fat bodies aren't just a repulsive outside obstructing a thin and attractive person inside, but that a fat person in their own right is beautiful and sexy. Fat people are still people, and fat bodies should be celebrated like this, not just shat upon like most people do. Reading this book was so lovely and refreshing. It was validating in all the right ways. Also, it had a little cookbook at the end, and it was so funny. I used Milkfed for my final 2 prompts. Jean, which is to read about a mom-child relationship. Milkfed is all about how the protagonist struggles to have a relationship with her mother, and even goes so far as to have a detox from her, cutting her out of her life entirely for 90 days. I also used this book for regular-sized Rudy, reading a book greater than 250 pages. While many of the books I read could have fit this prompt, I chose to give it to Milkfed so it could have more of a presence on the board. And with that, I completed the Bob's Burgers Readathon! I am so proud of myself for the amount of reading I did for this. I may not have finished it within the allotted time, but with my extenuating circumstances, I allowed myself an extension. Still, I spent 2 months preparing for this readathon, and I am so satisfied to have finally done it. Did you participate in the Bob's Burgers Readathon? Let me know how yours went in the comments below. Or if you've read or would like to read any of these books, I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if it pleases and sparkles, I'll see you in the next video. Mwah!